Okay, good afternoon. My name is Ephraim Lev. I'm from University of Haifa and the Technion. And I'm very happy. I was asked to be the moderator of this session, and I'm very happy to do so. And I would like to present our speaker. He will talk for 20 minutes, and then we'll have a discussion. As you see, we are fewer, however better, I think. So we'll start with Dr. François Héran. I hope I pronounce Héran. Okay. And Dr. Héran studied in few or several distinguished institutions in France, in Paris. And later on, he worked beside research. He worked mainly for governmental institutions, doing surveys and dealing with demography, with population study, and so on. And since we heard him before, I will let you give your speech, and later on we'll do our conversation. Please.
Thank you. So I have no PowerPoint for the simple reason that I forgot my laptop in Paris, and so it's an excellent proof, an experiment. Durkheim, the famous sociologist, gave two examples of anomia. Anomia is this famous concept of structural disorder, etc. The first example is very well known. It's how the industrial work is fragmented and the worker doesn't have any idea of the whole, there's no holistic view. And the second example is the division of scientific work. He gives the example of the scientific work which was so dispersed, fragmented, that a researcher has absolutely no possibility of having an idea of the role he's playing within the whole system. Well, so this is an important constraint we have to face. I shall base my presentation on the experience we have in France, but trying to generalize. And a priori, the context is not very favorable in France for interdisciplinary research, which is the bulk of my presentation would be dedicated to interdisciplinary research. We are, as you already know now, working in the framework of societal challenges as defined by the European Union and more or less transposed to the French situation. ANR has been funded by chemists and physicists, and in the first year, well, 9 years ago, the social sciences and humanities were not even present in the first year, so it has to be the place of humanities and social science has to be conquered year after year, and this work is not finished yet. So it was not very favorable, but we are experimenting now for the third year a new system. Instead of organizing thematic calls each year on a rotational system on different topics, we have now what we call a generic call. Each year we launch a big call which embraces all disciplines and embraces all the challenges defined by Europe. And this generic call more or less corresponds to 80% of all the budget of ANR. We have additional programs, but the bulk of our activity is really focused on the generic call. And so the generic call is divided into 8 or 9 challenges, societal challenges. There is something positive for interdisciplinarity in this system, because we can, as we launch all these calls simultaneously, it's a huge tsunami that we have to face service after service. We are able first to transfer some experts from one challenge to another, from one committee to another. We have the possibility of organizing very easily joint committees, because all these committees are working simultaneously. And so we have, I shall elaborate a little more later on. And we can constitute or reconstitute or redefine the borders of our committees very easily from one year to another. We have as a whole 40 committees, and these committees more or less correspond not to disciplines but to problematics, to topics, some topics, but as consistent as possible. And this manages the possibility of organizing, for example, a joint committee between humanities, social science, and the health challenge. So we have, for example, a joint committee on public health, which work that way, with common experts, with a unique committee. We have another example of a joint committee with digital information, science of information. And so the digital humanities are dealt with through a joint committee between my department and the Department of the Digital and Mathematic Sciences. We don't have any division a priori between social sciences and humanities, and I must say we are always completely puzzled when we discover that in other agencies this divide is so strong. I'll just give an example. An historian, a young historian, a French historian, had submitted a call in a multilateral call on the comparisons of the wages between men and women since centuries. So she succeeded in gathering a lot of data on the wages of men and women in several firms and fabrics and administrations since 2 or 3 centuries. A huge work, and she had the idea of exploiting these data. She was an economist. She's an economist himself. A project had been rejected by, it was an NWO, at the face of eligibility, because the dimension was merely historical, so that was not social sciences, it was humanities. And of course, I had to explain to this young researcher, who was completely abashed. She could not believe it. She could not believe that, because in France, history is a social science. We have the Brodel tradition, we have the HESS tradition. We cannot conceive history as something, it is necessarily a social science. Okay. So the idea that a comparison of wages during centuries between men and women in economic history, the idea that economic history could not be included within social sciences was absolutely unthinkable for us. And this gives you a very vivid idea of how this division, these institutional divisions created by the institutional university divisions, are framing our brains. They are dividing our brains into 2, hemispheres or something like that. But in fact, it suffices to have another experience abroad to realize that in fact these institutions are completely arbitrary, and we can work without them. So this is to me one of the best utilities of this meeting, to confront our common experiences and to reflect upon the categories we are working on, the categories which very often are depending from institutional histories but have nothing to do with science. So we have also, with this generic call, the possibility of pushing the experts and PIs as well together to characterize themselves. So we ask them to characterize themselves in a symmetric way. First of all, they have to describe the ERC descriptors, or the disciplines at the most disaggregate level. And they can mention 1, 2, or 3 of these disciplines. And so this gives you a very interesting idea of how the researchers themselves are conceiving of their project from the perspective, the disciplinary perspective. They have also to make a selection between a menu of keywords, and they have the possibility of adding new or free keywords in these lists. And this is specific for social sciences and humanities. I introduced this device, or I distorted the general device, and they have to indicate their main, the category of methods or sources they are using. For example, is it a content analysis? Is it prosopography, cohorts, qualitative survey, quantitative survey, or mixed surveys, exploitation of archives, and so on and so on. So we have 40 or 45 possibilities of describing the main source and the main method used in the project. And the experts and the researchers use exactly the same characterization device, and this helps us. It's not mechanical at all, but it helps us to match experts with the projects. And of course, we try, and this is extremely difficult, we try to recruit experts who correspond to the different facets of the project if this project is multidisciplinary. It's not that easy because, of course, we have 2 rules. Every project must have absolutely 4 evaluations, assessments. It is 4 because we have checked that if we have only 3, it suffices to have a very and extremely severe or exaggeratedly severe evaluation to have a depressive impact on the note, on the final rank or mark, whereas with 4 marks, it's extremely difficult for just one individual one outlier to have this impact on the final note. So 4, but in the health sector, very often 5 or 6 evaluators in the health sector. But well, it's quite. I can explain if you want. One of the interesting consequences of this device is that by showing this menu, by displaying this menu of a long list of methods and sources, we legitimate in a certain way the methodological pluralism. People understand that yes, qualitative surveys, provided they are correctly carried on, etc., are perfectly legitimate. We don't privilege, for example, quantitative surveys or things like that. And so that content analysis, analysis of discourse analysis, etc., of course, is something perfectly legitimate. It depends on the topic, it depends on the way. And it is up to the evaluators to deem the quality of this, of the methods. Now, there is also some consequences of this huge generic call. We don't know to what extent it is positive or negative. There is a direct competition of social sciences and humanities with all the other projects. They are not. It's not a separate competition in a certain way. And so the final decision of financing projects depends, well, as a whole, depends on the number of submissions, the number of applications. Last year, as I told you already this morning, we succeed in increasing strongly the number of applications, because one of the big issues we have in the social sciences and even more in humanities is the fact that these communities don't submit enough. For example, mixed unit of research, which is the most ordinary form of institutional form of a research unit in France, UMR, Unité Mixte de Recherche. Some of they may have 20 researchers or 200. Their size is rather variable. But if you take a research unit in chemistry or in health sciences, they can submit 20 projects. And the record is 43 projects for just one unit of chemical science in Rennes, in Brittany. So if you classify all the research units from CNRS, from INSERM, the Institute of Medical Research, from the INRA, the System of Agricultural Research, etc., all these big, Institut Pasteur and so on, if you classify all these units, research units by the number of applications, you have to arrive to the 160th position or something like that to find the first research unit in social sciences and humanities. In a medical research unit, for example, it is very frequent, according to our observation, that 5 researchers have a sort of entente, form a sort of consortium, and instead of submitting one project, they submit 5 projects. They introduce variants. They have in their laptop all the elements of a submission,